The year was 1887, and winter had descended upon the Colorado Territory with the merciless fury of a biblical plague. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets across the endless expanse of prairie, transforming the landscape into a desolate wilderness of white that stretched unbroken toward a sky the color of old pewter. The wind howled across the flatlands with the voice of a banshee, driving ice crystals like tiny daggers against any surface foolish enough to stand in its path. The small railway station of Cedar Falls crouched against this onslaught like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Its weathered wooden frame hunched beneath accumulating drifts that threatened to bury it entirely. Yellow lanterns swayed violently from their posts, casting wild dancing shadows that leaped and writhed across the snow-covered platform like tormented spirits. The thin glass of the station windows rattled incessantly in their frames, a constant percussion that spoke of nature's indifference to human ambition. Erin Calloway, though that was not the name she had been born with, pressed herself deeper into the corner of the covered platform, her thin woolen shawl drawn tight around shoulders that shook not merely from the bitter cold, but from the crushing, suffocating weight of abandonment that had settled upon her like a shroud. 6 days had passed since she had stepped down from the westbound train, her legs trembling with exhaustion and her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror that had made her stomach churn. 6 days, and still no one had come for her. The leather satchel that contained her few earthly possessions sat beside her on the splintered wooden bench, its brass clasps tarnished and its corners worn smooth by countless journeys. Inside, carefully wrapped in her spare chemise, lay a packet of letters that had once seemed like salvation itself, correspondence from a man who had promised her a new life, a husband, perhaps even the belonging she had never known in her 27 years of existence. Dear Miss Calloway. The first letter had begun in careful masculine script. Your advertisement in the Eastern Matrimonial News has captured my attention most thoroughly. I am a man of 35 years, established in property and business, seeking a wife of good character and gentle disposition to share my home in the Colorado Territory. Your letter speaks of qualities I greatly admire: industry, piety, and a willingness to embrace the challenges of frontier life. If you are truly, as you describe yourself, I believe we might find great happiness together. How foolish those words seemed now, how cruelly empty in the face of her present reality. Erin's fingers, numb with cold despite her worn gloves, traced the outline of the letters through the fabric of her coat pocket. Each crinkle of paper was like a small knife twisting in her chest, a reminder of hopes that had proved as insubstantial as morning mist. Erin Calloway was 27 years old, though hardship had carved its signature across her features with the precision of a master sculptor, working in flesh and bone. Orphaned at the age of 12, when fever had claimed both her parents within a single, horrific week, she had spent her adolescent years shuttled between a succession of temporary homes, some kind, others merely dutiful, all of them making it clear that her presence was a burden to be endured rather than a blessing to be celebrated. The last family had kept her for 3 years longer than any other, and she had begun to believe that perhaps she had finally found a place where she might be allowed to belong. The Caldwells of Beacon Hill had treated her almost as a daughter, providing her with education, fine clothes, and the kind of security she had never dared to dream possible. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell had been particularly kind, taking Erin under her wing and treating her more as a beloved niece than a paid companion. But their kindness had made the betrayal that followed all the more devastating, all the more impossible to bear. The memory of that terrible morning 6 months ago still had the power to make Erin's breath catch in her throat. She had awakened to find the house in chaos. Servants running through the halls, Mrs. Caldwell weeping inconsolably in the morning room. The emerald necklace, a family heirloom worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, had vanished from the locked jewelry chest in the master bedroom. Erin had been the only person besides family members with access to Mrs. Caldwell's private chambers, the only one trusted with the combination to the safe where the most precious pieces were kept. Despite her tearful protestations of innocence, despite her genuine horror at the accusation, the evidence had seemed overwhelming. The necklace had been found hidden beneath her mattress, wrapped in one of her own handkerchiefs, placed there by hands she had never seen, but whose work was devastatingly thorough. The truth that Mrs. Caldwell's gambling-addicted stepson, Charles, had stolen the necklace to pay pressing debts and planted it in Aaron's room to deflect suspicion from himself, had only come to light weeks later, long after Aaron had fled Boston in disgrace. And by then, the damage had been irreversible. The story had followed her from city to city like a hunting dog on a scent, making it impossible for her to find steady employment or any measure of peace. The matrimonial advertisement had seemed like Providence itself when she had discovered it in a discarded newspaper, a chance to disappear entirely into the vastness of the American West, where no one would know her story, and she might finally become someone new. But as she sat now on the station platform, her breath forming ghostly plumes in the bitter air, she understood with crystalline clarity that some shadows are simply too dark, too persistent to be outrun by mere distance. Travelers hurried past her refuge with collars pulled high against the wind, their faces buried deep in mufflers and scarves. Some cast her fleeting glances, edged with pity she had become a familiar sight over these 6 days after all, while others looked upon her with a sharp blade of judgment, their expressions making it clear that they considered her presence a blight upon their respectable community. She had approached several men during those first few days, her desperation overcoming her natural shyness and modesty. With trembling voice and downcast eyes, she had inquired whether any of them might be waiting for a bride, whether any of them might be the mysterious correspondent who had promised her a home. The first man had laughed outright, a harsh braying sound that had carried clearly across the platform and drawn the attention of every person within earshot. "Not waiting for you, miss," he had declared with cruel amusement, tipping his hat in mock courtesy. "That's certain sure." The second had waved her away with visible irritation, muttering under his breath about swindles and desperate women who ought to know their place. A third had simply shaken his head without meeting her eyes, as if her very presence embarrassed him beyond endurance. Each rejection had pressed against her ribs like a physical weight, accumulating layers of shame and humiliation, until she feared her chest might crack open entirely under the burden. Inside the station's waiting room, she could hear the whispered conversations of the local women, their voices carrying clearly through the frost-etched windows like the buzzing of wasps. 6 days now and no man to claim her. Must be something terribly wrong with her, don't you think? What sort of woman travels halfway across the continent to marry a complete stranger? The desperate sort, I'd wager. The sort with secrets to hide. Look at her clothes worn thin as paper. Probably hasn't got 2 coins to rub together. And that face plain as pudding, if you ask me. No wonder her intended took one look and decided to disappear. Aaron bent her head lower, pretending to study the accumulating snow at her feet. But their words struck her like thrown stones, each whispered judgment confirming what she had always suspected about herself, that she was fundamentally flawed, fundamentally unworthy of the simple human dignity of being wanted and valued. The cruel irony was not lost on her. She had fled Boston to escape false accusations of theft, only to find herself accused here of a different sort of moral failing, the crime of being unwanted, unclaimed, abandoned like damaged goods at a market stall. In both cases, she was judged not on her actions or her character, but on circumstances entirely beyond her control. By the evening of the 6th day, as shadows grew long, and the temperature plummeted toward levels that would freeze exposed flesh within minutes, Aaron finally acknowledged what she had been trying to deny. She could not remain on this platform indefinitely. Her small supply of bread and cheese, carefully rationed to last as long as possible, was nearly exhausted. More critically, the station master had begun to eye her with increasing concern and barely concealed irritation, and she sensed that his limited patience would not endure much longer. The few coins remaining in her purse would not purchase even a single night's lodging at the town's boarding house, assuming they would even accept a woman of her questionable circumstances. The next eastbound train would not arrive for another 4 days, and she lacked the funds for a ticket, even if she had somewhere to go, which she decidedly did not. As darkness settled over the prairie, like a heavy blanket studded with brittle stars, Erin finally rose from her vigil. Her legs trembled beneath her, whether from cold weakness or simple despair, she could not say. Moving like a woman in a dream, she walked slowly toward the edge of town, her worn boots crunching through snow that had begun to freeze solid in the deepening cold. She had no destination in mind, no plan beyond the vague hope that movement might warm her blood, and perhaps clear her thoughts enough to conceive of some solution to her impossible situation. The wind cut through her threadbare coat like knives, stealing what little warmth her body had managed to generate during her long hours of sitting. It was then, as she passed beneath one of the town's few street lamps, that she first became aware of him. A tall figure stood apart from the handful of other townspeople, still brave enough to venture out into the bitter night, his presence somehow both conspicuous and utterly motionless. He was positioned near the freight office, partially concealed in shadow, but when the yellow glow of the lamplight caught his features, Erin glimpsed something that made her pause mid-step, despite her haste to escape the cold. His face was weathered and angular, carved by years of wind and sun into lines that spoke of a life lived entirely outdoors. There was strength in the set of his jaw, intelligence in the steady regard of his dark eyes, and something else, a quality of watchful patience, that reminded her of a hawk circling high above the prairie, taking careful measure of everything below. He appeared to be studying her, though so subtly and with such stillness that she might have imagined it entirely. There was no pity in his gaze, none of the cruel amusement she had grown accustomed to seeing in the faces of other men. Instead, there was something that looked almost like consideration, as if he were weighing something in his mind, calculating probabilities she could not guess at. Roger Mallister, though Erin did not yet know his name, had indeed been watching her for the better part of 6 days. He had witnessed her arrival, had observed her initial hopeful inquiries gradually give way to desperate pleading, had seen her grow smaller and more fragile, with each passing hour of abandonment. He had watched other men laugh at her distress, had seen the local women whisper and point and pass judgment from their positions of smug security. Something about her dignity in the face of such treatment had caught his attention and held it with surprising tenacity. The way she maintained her posture, even when her situation became most hopeless, the careful manner in which she smoothed her worn skirts and adjusted her thin shawl as if maintaining appearances might somehow alter her circumstances. These small acts of stubborn pride spoke to something deep within his own experience. Roger was a man of 38 years, though he carried himself with the economical movements and careful bearing that come from a lifetime of physical labor and self-reliance. He owned a substantial ranch, some 5 miles outside of Cedar Falls, nearly 2,000 acres of good grazing land, that he had purchased piece by piece over the course of 15 years, each acre paid for with sweat and careful saving, and the kind of grinding determination that separates those who succeed in the West from those who give up and return to whatever softness they came from. The townspeople considered him wealthy, which by local standards he was, though they also considered him peculiar. A man who could go days without speaking more than a handful of words, who seemed to prefer the company of his horses and cattle to that of his fellow humans. They respected his success and his reputation for fair dealing, but they also found him difficult to understand, impossible to draw into the casual social interactions that bound their small community together. The truth was that Roger had learned the value of silence through bitter experience. 8 years earlier, he had been engaged to marry Margaret Whitmore, the daughter of Cedar Falls's most prominent merchant family. It had seemed like a perfect match, advantageous for both families, built on genuine affection and mutual respect. Margaret was beautiful, accomplished, well-educated, everything a man could want in a wife. But 3 weeks before their wedding, Margaret had run away with a traveling patent medicine salesman, leaving behind only a note explaining that she could not bear the thought of marrying a man so dull and serious, so lacking in conversation and charm. The humiliation had cut deeper than Roger cared to admit, not merely because of the public embarrassment, but because Margaret's words had struck at his deepest fears about himself. In the wake of that betrayal, he had built walls of silence around himself that had grown higher and more impenetrable with each passing year. He told himself that solitude was preferable to the risk of further rejection, that his ranch and his animals provided all the companionship he required. But watching Aaron Calloway's quiet suffering over these past 6 days had awakened something in him that he had thought permanently buried, a protective instinct perhaps, or simply the recognition of a kindred spirit who understood what it meant to be left behind. When he saw her stumble slightly on the icy boardwalk, when he noticed the way she pressed one hand to her stomach as if trying to quiet its demands for food, Roger made a decision that surprised him with its suddenness and certainty. Aaron had walked perhaps 3 blocks beyond the town's main thoroughfare when she heard the steady crunch of footsteps in the snow behind her. Her first instinct was fear she had learned through bitter experience, that attention from strange men rarely ended well for women in her vulnerable position. But something about the measured pace of the footsteps, their unhurried rhythm, suggested something other than predatory intent. She did not turn around, partly from pride and partly from uncertainty about what she might see. The footsteps maintained their distance, neither hurrying to overtake her nor falling behind, and eventually her curiosity overcame her caution. When she finally glanced over her shoulder, she saw the tall man from the freight office walking perhaps 15 paces behind her, his hands thrust deep in the pockets of his wool coat, his breath visible in white puffs against the star-filled darkness. When he saw her turn, he stopped as well, and for a long moment they regarded each other across the snowy distance. The wind had died down somewhat, leaving the night eerily quiet, except for the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere in town, and the soft whisper of snow settling on the pine boughs that lined the road. "You'll not last the night walking that road," he said finally, his voice deep and economical, carrying easily in the still air. There was no accusation in his tone, no judgment, merely a statement of fact delivered with the same calm certainty he might have used to comment on the weather. Aaron's throat tightened. She had been thinking the same thing, had been acutely aware that her thin coat and worn boots were utterly inadequate protection against a night in the open, when the temperature was dropping toward levels that could kill an unprepared person within hours. But hearing the words spoken aloud made her situation feel suddenly more immediate, more desperately dangerous. She began, then stopped. What was there to say that she had nowhere to go? That she was entirely dependent on the charity of strangers who had already demonstrated their disinclination to help her? The admission stuck in her throat like a physical obstruction, too humiliating to voice. The man studied her face in the pale light reflected from the snow, and Aaron had the unsettling sensation that he could see straight through to her soul, could read the desperation and fear she was trying so desperately to hide. "There's a spare room at my place," he continued after a moment, his tone remaining carefully neutral. "Nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry. Clean bed, good roof over your head. You're welcome to it if you've need." The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge across a chasm, and Aaron felt her heart begin to race with a mixture of hope and terror. Every hard-won lesson of her experience warned her against accepting help from unknown men, reminded her that such offers rarely came without a price she might not be willing to pay. She had learned to be suspicious of kindness, to look for the hidden motives that so often lurked beneath seemingly generous gestures. But the alternative, spending the night in the open with the temperature plummeting and no shelter available, seemed even more dangerous than whatever risks might come with accepting his invitation. "Just for tonight," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, and the words nearly lost in the soft sigh of wind through the pines. "If you could spare it. I don't want to impose." He nodded once, a brief, economical gesture that somehow managed to convey both understanding and acceptance. One night then, another if needed. But you should know there'll be talk. This town has little else to occupy its time, and folks here have strong opinions about propriety. The warning was kindly meant. Aaron realized, though, it sent a fresh wave of anxiety coursing through her chest. More judgment, more whispered conversations, more reasons for people to find her wanting. But what choice did she have? She could face social disapproval, or she could freeze to death in the Colorado wilderness. The decision was not difficult to make. "I understand," she said, though she wasn't entirely certain she understood anything at all anymore. Her life had become a series of impossible choices, each one leading her further from the security and respectability she had once taken for granted. "Roger Mallister," the man said, extending his hand in formal introduction. "And you'd be the young lady who's been waiting at the station." "Aaron Calloway," she replied, accepting his handshake and finding his grip firm, calloused, reassuring in its steadiness. "And yes, I suppose I am." The walk to Roger's ranch was conducted in companionable silence, their footsteps crunching rhythmically through snow that continued to fall in thick, lazy flakes that caught the moonlight like scattered diamonds. Roger adjusted his pace to match hers, neither hurrying nor lagging. And Aaron found something oddly comforting in his steady presence beside her. The trail wound through stands of pine and aspen that creaked and whispered in the wind, their snow-laden branches creating a cathedral-like canopy overhead. Occasionally, Aaron caught glimpses of wildlife. The bright eyes of an owl watching from its perch, the quick flash of a rabbit disappearing into the underbrush, and the distant howl of coyotes singing their ancient songs to the star-filled sky. "How far?" she asked after they had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Another mile or so," Roger replied. "Not much farther." Despite her exhaustion and the growing numbness in her feet, Aaron found herself oddly reluctant for the journey to end. There was something peaceful about walking through the snow-covered wilderness with this quiet, steady man beside her, a sense of safety and security she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since her arrival in Cedar Falls, she was not being judged or pitied or dismissed. She was simply accepted. The ranch house, when it finally appeared through a gap in the trees, was larger and more substantial than Aaron had expected. Built of hewn logs, chinked with mud and moss, it stood 2 stories tall with a broad front porch and several outbuildings scattered around the clearing. Smoke rose from the stone chimney in a thin, welcoming column, and warm yellow light glowed behind curtained windows like a beacon of hope in the wilderness. "It's beautiful," Aaron said softly, meaning it with every fiber of her being. After days of uncertainty and nights spent shivering on hard benches, the sight of this solid, welcoming home seemed like a miracle. Roger pushed open the front door and stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter first. The rush of warm air that greeted her was like a physical embrace, carrying with it the rich scents of wood smoke, leather, and something that might have been beef stew simmering over the fire. Aaron stepped across the threshold, clutching her thin shawl as if still braced for rejection, and looked around with wonder. The main room was spacious and comfortable, furnished with handcrafted wooden furniture that showed the care and skill of its maker. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth crackling cheerfully with split logs that cast dancing shadows across the room. Bookshelves lined another wall, their shelves filled with volumes that spoke of an educated mind and wide-ranging interests. A dining table surrounded by sturdy chairs occupied the center of the room, and everything was spotlessly clean organized with the precision of a man accustomed to caring for himself. "Sit," Roger said, simply gesturing toward a chair near the fire. "You look ready to collapse." Aaron's legs obeyed before her mind had fully processed the command, and she sank gratefully into the offered chair. The heat from the fireplace began to penetrate her chilled bones, and she felt herself truly relax for the first time in days. Roger moved about the room with practiced efficiency, ladling stew from a pot that hung over the fire into a heavy ceramic bowl, cutting thick slices from a loaf of fresh bread, pouring coffee from a pot that kept warm on the hearth. He set the meal before her along with proper silverware and a cloth napkin, then retreated to give her privacy to eat. The first spoonful of stew nearly undid Aaron entirely. It was rich and savory thick, with tender beef potatoes, carrots, and onions seasoned with herbs that made her mouth water. She had to pause, closing her eyes against the sudden threat of tears, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of being truly fed for the first time in days. "This is delicious," she managed when she could trust her voice again. "Did you make it yourself?" "Nothing fancy," Roger replied from his position near the window, where he stood looking out at the falling snow. "A man learns to cook for himself out here, or he goes hungry." Aaron ate slowly, savoring each bite and trying not to appear too desperate despite her genuine hunger. As warmth spread through her body and her immediate physical needs were met, she found herself able to truly observe her surroundings and her host. Roger Mallister was a man of few words, that much was clear, but there was nothing cold or unfriendly about his silence. Rather, it seemed to be the quietness of someone who thought carefully before speaking, who preferred action to empty conversation. He was handsome in a weathered, masculine way, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that showed threads of silver at the temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into prairie sun and wind. But it was his hands that told the real story of who he was. They were the hands of a working man, calloused and scarred, permanently stained with dirt and rope burns, yet gentle as they had helped her with her coat, steady as they had served her food. These were hands that built things, that cared for animals, that could be trusted with fragile things. "I should explain," Aaron began when she had finished eating, but Roger held up one of those steady hands to stop her. "You don't owe me explanations," he said simply. "Your business is your own. I offer shelter to a fellow human being in need, nothing more, nothing less." The simple dignity of his words brought tears to Aaron's eyes. How long had it been since someone had offered her kindness without expecting something in return? How long since she had been treated with basic human respect rather than suspicion or pity? "Even so," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know that I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express." Roger nodded once, then moved to a large chest near the far wall, from which he withdrew a quilt that was clearly handmade patches of various fabrics, sewn together with careful, precise stitches, in a pattern that spoke of both skill and patience. "This was my mother's work," he said, draping it gently around Aaron's shoulders. She'd have wanted it used to comfort someone in need. The quilt smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, and its weight settled around Aaron like an embrace. She pulled it closer, feeling safer and more protected than she had in months. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking like thin ice under the weight of her gratitude. Roger nodded and moved back to his position by the window, his eyes on the storm that continued to rage outside. The silence that fell between them was not empty, but full charged with unspoken questions and careful consideration, like the quiet that comes before important decisions are made. Aaron slept that first night in Roger's home more deeply and peacefully than she had in months. The spare bedroom he had offered her was simple but comfortable. A single bed with clean linens, a washstand with pitcher and basin, a small window that looked out over snow-covered pastures toward distant mountains. Most importantly, it had a door that could be closed and locked, giving her the privacy and security she had not known since fleeing Boston. She woke before dawn to find that Roger had already risen and gone out to tend his animals, leaving coffee warming on the stove and fresh wood stacked beside the kitchen fire. A note on the table, written in the same careful script she remembered from her mysterious correspondence letters, simply said, "Help yourself to whatever you need. Back by noon, R.M." The discovery that Roger was indeed her intended correspondent should have brought relief, but instead it filled Aaron with a complex mixture of emotions she found difficult to untangle. Why had he not revealed himself immediately? Why allow her to suffer through 6 days of abandonment and humiliation when he had been watching all along? As she prepared a simple breakfast from the supplies in his well-stocked pantry, Aaron began to form theories. Perhaps he had seen her arrive and been disappointed by her appearance. She was, after all, no beauty, especially after days of sleeping rough and eating poorly. Perhaps he had been testing her character, observing how she handled adversity before deciding whether to claim her. Or perhaps he had simply had second thoughts about the entire arrangement and taken her in out of pity rather than genuine interest. Whatever his motivations, Aaron found herself in an impossible position. She was grateful beyond measure for his kindness, but she was also acutely aware that their relationship was built on false foundations. He knew her only as Aaron Calloway, the desperate mail-order bride who had answered his advertisement. He had no idea that she was actually Anna Caldwell, fugitive from false accusations, carrying secrets that could destroy any possibility of the respectable life he was offering. The weight of deception sat heavily on her shoulders as she moved about his kitchen, washing dishes and tidying up in a futile attempt to repay his kindness through small acts of domestic service. Every kindness he showed her felt like another link in a chain of lies that would eventually drag them both down. Roger returned shortly after noon, stamping snow from his boots and hanging his coat by the door, with the efficient movements of a man following long-established routines. He paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of Aaron moving comfortably about his kitchen, and something in his expression softened. "Smells good in here," he said, nodding toward the pot of soup she had prepared from vegetables found in his root cellar. "I hope you don't mind," Aaron said, suddenly uncertain. "I wanted to do something useful." "Mind?" Roger's weathered face creased in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Ma'am, I've been cooking my own meals for 8 years. Having someone else take over kitchen duties is about as welcome as rain after a drought." They ate lunch together in companionable silence, and Aaron found herself studying his face for any sign of recognition, any indication that he knew she was the woman who had been corresponding with him for months. But if Roger was aware of her true identity, he gave no sign of it. "The storm's supposed to clear tonight," he said as they finished eating. "Roads should be passable again by tomorrow." The words hung in the air between them like a question, and Aaron felt her heart sink. He was telling her as gently as possible that her time here was limited, that she would need to make other arrangements, find somewhere else to go. "I see," she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Of course, I've imposed on your kindness long enough. That's not what I meant." Roger said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been regret. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. I just thought, well, I figured you might be eager to get back to town to continue waiting for your intended." The irony of the situation was almost more than Aaron could bear. Here she sat, having found the man she had traveled halfway across the continent to marry, and neither of them could acknowledge the connection that should have united them. She was trapped by her false identity. He was bound by his apparent decision to remain anonymous, and both of them were dancing around a truth that neither felt able to speak. "Actually," Aaron said carefully, "I don't think he's coming. My intended, I mean. I think perhaps he changed his mind." Roger was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "His loss," he said finally, and the simple words carried more weight than a dozen flowery compliments. Over the following days, as winter maintained its grip on the Colorado Territory and travel remained treacherous, Aaron and Roger settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. She took over the domestic tasks that had been neglected during his years of bachelorhood, bringing a woman's touch to the solid, masculine comfort of his home. He continued his daily work with the cattle and horses, but began to include her in conversations about ranch management, seeking her opinions with a respect that surprised and delighted her. Their relationship grew in the quiet spaces between words, built on shared meals and comfortable silences, and the thousand small courtesies that marked the beginning of genuine affection. Roger taught her to ride his gentlest mare, and Erin discovered a natural aptitude for horsemanship that pleased them both. She shared her knowledge of literature and music, and found that beneath his taciturn exterior, Roger possessed a sharp intellect and wide-ranging curiosity about the world beyond his ranch. But even as their friendship deepened, Erin remained acutely aware of the secrets that lay between them, like hidden chasms. She knew that Roger was her mysterious correspondent, though he continued to maintain the fiction that they were strangers. More troubling still was her own deception and the false name, the hidden past, the terrible secret that had driven her from Boston and would destroy any chance of happiness if it were ever discovered. The crisis came on a bitter February morning when Erin was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. She had grown careless in her contentment, lulled by the security of Roger's protection and the peace she had found in their daily routines. So when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, she felt only mild curiosity, rather than the sharp spike of fear that had once been her constant companion. But when she looked up to see a familiar figure dismounting from a travel-worn horse, her blood turned to ice in her veins. Detective Morrison had found her at last. Detective Morrison was exactly as Erin remembered him, a thin, sharp-faced man in his 40s, dressed in a city suit that looked completely out of place against the rugged backdrop of the Colorado wilderness. His pale eyes swept across the ranch yard with the calculating gaze of a predator, taking in every detail, cataloging every possible advantage or weakness. "Miss Anna Caldwell," he said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to intimidating others. "Or should I say, Miss Erin Calloway? You've led me quite a chase across half the continent, but it ends here." Erin felt herself freezing in place, all her old fears rushing back with paralyzing force. This man represented everything she had been running from: the power of wealth and influence, the weight of false accusations, the certainty that truth mattered less than appearances in a world controlled by men like Charles Caldwell and their hired agents. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, though her voice came out as little more than a whisper. Morrison's smile was thin and predatory. "Come now, Miss Caldwell. We both know why I'm here. Charles Caldwell has been most concerned about your whereabouts. There are still questions to be answered about the theft of his stepmother's necklace." "I didn't steal anything," Erin said, finding her voice at last. "You know I didn't. The real thief confessed months ago." "Confessed?" Morrison laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant in the morning air. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Miss Caldwell. Charles Caldwell is a respected member of Boston society. His word carries considerable weight, while yours." He shrugged meaningfully. It was then that Roger appeared around the corner of the house, drawn by the sound of unfamiliar voices. He took in the scene at a glance: Erin's pale, frightened face, the strange man in city clothes, the tension that crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. "Morning," Roger said calmly, his hand resting casually on the rifle he carried. "Can I help you with something?" Morrison turned his predatory smile on Roger, and Erin saw him quickly assess this new factor in his calculations. "Detective Morrison, Pinkerton Agency," he said, producing a leather folder from his coat. "I'm here on official business, pursuing a fugitive from justice." "That's so." Roger's voice remained calm, but Erin could hear the steel underneath. "And what crime is this fugitive supposed to have committed?" "The theft," Morrison replied smoothly. "Grand larceny, to be precise. Miss Caldwell here is wanted for questioning in connection with the theft of valuable jewelry from her former employers in Boston." Erin, Roger said, never taking his eyes off Morrison, "Is there something you need to tell me?" The moment stretched taut between them, and Aaron felt the weight of decision pressing down on her shoulders. She could continue the deception, claim ignorance, hope that somehow Roger would protect her from Morrison's accusations. Or she could trust him with the truth, all of it, and face whatever consequences followed. "My real name is Anna Caldwell." She said the words tumbling out in a rush before her courage could fail her. "I worked as a companion for the Caldwell family in Boston. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell's emerald necklace was stolen, and I was accused because I was the only person besides family members who had access to her room. But I didn't take it, Roger. I swear to you, I didn't take anything." Roger's expression didn't change, but Aaron saw something shift in his dark eyes, not judgment or disappointment, but a kind of quiet assessment, as if he were weighing her words against his own observations of her character. "And yet," Morrison interjected smoothly, "the necklace was found hidden in your room, wrapped in your own handkerchief. Rather damning evidence, wouldn't you say? Evidence that was planted there." Aaron said, finding strength in Roger's steady presence. "By Charles Caldwell to cover his own theft. He's the one who stole the necklace to pay his gambling debts." Morrison's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "A convenient story, Miss Caldwell, but hardly credible. Why would a wealthy young man from one of Boston's finest families need to steal from his own stepmother because his gambling debts were about to ruin him?" Aaron replied. "Because he'd borrowed money from dangerous men who were threatening violence if he didn't pay. Because he knew that suspicion would fall on me, the hired companion, with no family and no influence to defend herself." "Prove it," Morrison said simply. The challenge hung in the air between them, and Aaron felt her heart sink. How could she prove anything? She had fled Boston before Charles's confession came to light, had been running ever since, leaving no trail that might lead back to vindication. But Roger stepped forward, his rifle held casually but ready. "I think you'd better leave," he said quietly. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "I'm here on official business, Mr. Mallister, Roger Mallister. And this is my land, which makes me the law here until you can produce proper warrants signed by a Colorado judge. I have authority to make a citizen's arrest. Do you?" Roger's voice remained calm, but there was something in his tone that made Morrison take an involuntary step backward. "Show me your warrant, detective. Show me the official paperwork that gives you jurisdiction in Colorado territory." Morrison's confident facade began to crack slightly. "The Pinkerton Agency has authority to investigate crimes, yes. To pursue fugitives across state lines with proper documentation, certainly. But I don't see any warrants, detective. I don't see any official papers at all, just a man with a badge harassing a woman on my property." Aaron watched the confrontation with growing amazement. Roger was standing up to Morrison with a quiet authority she had never imagined possible. Where she had seen only her own powerlessness against institutional authority, Roger saw a bully who could be faced down with courage and determination. "This isn't over," Morrison said, but his words lacked conviction. "Yes," Roger replied, "it is. Mount up and ride out, detective. Miss Calloway is under my protection, and she'll remain so as long as she chooses." After Morrison departed, his threats and bluster fading with the sound of retreating hoofbeats, Aaron and Roger stood in the ranch yard, facing each other across a chasm of revealed truths and unspoken questions. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Aaron asked finally. "You knew from the beginning, didn't you? You're the one who placed the matrimonial advertisement." Roger was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. "I saw you at the station," he said finally. "Saw how you carried yourself, how you maintained your dignity, even when others were cruel. I wanted to know what kind of woman you really were before I revealed myself." "And what did you decide?" "That Charles Caldwell is a fool," Roger said simply. "And that whoever wrote those letters to me, the one signed Aaron Calloway, is exactly the kind of woman I'd want for a wife." Word of Detective Morrison's visit spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire, carried by ranch hands and traveling merchants who had witnessed the confrontation. By evening, the story had grown in the telling, until it bore little resemblance to the actual events. Aaron had become a dangerous criminal, Roger, a man harboring fugitives, their relationship a scandal that threatened the moral fabric of the entire community. The delegation that arrived at Roger's door 3 days later was larger and more determined than any that had come before. Sheriff Amos Garrett led the group, his weathered face grave with official concern. But he was flanked by nearly a dozen of the town's most prominent citizens: Judge Cornelius Blake Banker, Elijah Morse, Preacher Daniels, and Clara May Hutchinson among them. "Roger," Judge Blake said without preamble as they crowded into his cabin, "we need to discuss this situation." Aaron felt the familiar weight of judgment pressing down upon her as hostile eyes swept across the comfortable domestic scene she and Roger had created. She had been preparing dinner when they arrived, an apron tied around her waist, her sleeves rolled up from kneading bread, the very picture of domestic contentment that these people seemed to find so threatening. "What situation would that be, Judge?" Roger asked, his voice carefully controlled. Clara May stepped forward, her sharp features flushed with righteous indignation. "Don't play innocent with us, Roger Mallister. You're harboring a known criminal, a thief who's wanted by the law. It's a scandal that reflects on this entire community." "A known criminal?" Roger's eyebrows rose. "According to whom? A Pinkerton detective with no warrant and no official authority in Colorado territory." "According to common sense," Banker Morse interjected. "Why else would a detective travel all this way if the woman weren't guilty of something? Maybe you should ask Charles Caldwell that question," Aaron said, finding her voice at last. "Ask him why he's so desperate to keep me from returning to Boston that he'd hire private detectives to harass me." "Because you're a thief," Clara May declared with satisfaction. "Because you stole from the family that took you in, gave you a home, treated you like one of their own." "I stole nothing," Aaron replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Charles Caldwell stole his stepmother's necklace to pay gambling debts, then planted it in my room to avoid suspicion. He confessed to the crime months after I'd already fled in disgrace." "Convenient story," Judge Blake said skeptically. "Can you prove any of these accusations?" Aaron felt her heart sink. How could she prove anything from half a continent away, with no resources and no allies, except for the man standing beside her? But Sheriff Garrett cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Actually," he said slowly, "there might be something to what she's saying. I sent a telegram to the Boston police yesterday asking about the case. Got a reply this morning." He pulled a folded telegram from his coat pocket, and Aaron felt her breath catch in her throat. Whatever that message contained, it would determine her fate and Roger's as well. "Charles Caldwell was arrested 4 months ago for theft and fraud," Sheriff Garrett read aloud. "Confessed to stealing his stepmother's emerald necklace and framing his stepmother's companion, one Anna Caldwell. All charges against Miss Caldwell have been dropped. She is considered a victim, not a suspect." The silence that followed was deafening. Aaron felt her knees go weak with relief and vindication, while the assembled townspeople looked at each other with expressions ranging from embarrassment to stubborn disbelief. "Well," Judge Blake said after a long moment, "that does put a different complexion on things." "Does it?" Clara May's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "She's still been living here unmarried, sharing a roof with a bachelor, making a mockery of decent Christian values. Cleared of theft or not, it's still a scandal." "You're right," Roger said quietly, and Aaron felt her heart stop beating entirely. Was he going to ask her to leave? Had even vindication come too late to save what they had built together? But Roger crossed the room to where Aaron stood, taking her hands in his steady grip, and looked directly into her eyes. Anna Caldwell, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded cabin. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The proposal hung in the air like a prayer, and Erin felt the world shift around her. She searched Roger's weathered face, looking for any sign that this was merely a performance for their audience. But what she saw there was nothing but sincerity. And could it be love? You don't have to do this, she whispered, acutely aware of the dozen pairs of eyes watching their every movement. Not for them, not because of what they're saying. I'm not doing it for them. Roger interrupted gently. I'm doing it for us. For the future I want to build with you, if you'll have me. Tears spilled down Erin's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak, past the emotion choking her throat. Yes, she managed finally. Yes, I will marry you. The crowd of townspeople erupted in surprised murmurs, some approving, others skeptical, all clearly taken aback by the sudden turn of events. But Judge Blake stepped forward with something approaching satisfaction. Well then, he said, that settles the matter of propriety. Preacher Daniels, can you perform the ceremony? Tonight. Erin gasped, but Roger squeezed her hands reassuringly. No point in waiting, he said. Unless you'd prefer a formal ceremony with all the traditional fuss. Erin thought of the elaborate white wedding she had dreamed of as a girl's silk gown, orange blossoms, church filled with well-wishers. Then she looked around at the assembled townspeople, at Clara May's still disapproving face, at the mixture of curiosity and judgment in their eyes. No, she said firmly, tonight is perfect. And so by lamplight in Roger's cabin, with snow falling steadily outside and the wind howling across the prairie, Erin Calloway became Anna Mallister. Preacher Daniels performed the ceremony with nervous haste, as if afraid one of them might change their mind, while the townspeople stood witness with varying degrees of enthusiasm. When Roger kissed his new bride, a gentle, reverent touch that spoke of promises made and kept, Erin felt something settle in her chest that she had never experienced before. The absolute certainty of belonging, of being chosen and wanted and valued for exactly who she was. The townspeople departed soon after the ceremony, some offering congratulations that sounded genuine, others maintaining their skeptical silence. Clara May was among the last to leave, pausing at the door to deliver one final pronouncement. I suppose this makes it respectable, she said with obvious reluctance. But don't think this changes how some of us feel about the whole affair. We'll be watching. After the door closed behind them, Erin and Roger stood alone in their cabin. Truly, their cabin now. Erin realized with a thrill of wonder, listening to the retreating voices fade into the winter night. The weeks that followed their hasty wedding were a time of discovery and adjustment, as they learned to live together as husband and wife, rather than merely host and guest. Roger proved to be a considerate and patient husband, giving Erin time to grow comfortable with the intimacies of marriage, while never making her feel unwanted or undesired. Their physical relationship developed, gradually built on trust and genuine affection, rather than mere convenience or social expectation. Erin discovered that beneath Roger's taciturn exterior lay a passionate nature that had been held in check by years of solitude. He in turn found in Erin a partner who matched his intensity, while bringing a warmth and joy to his life that he had never imagined possible. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came news from Boston that vindicated Erin's faith in ultimate justice. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell had not only written to express her regret over the suffering her stepson had caused, but had also sent a substantial sum of money as compensation for the hardships Erin had endured. More importantly, she had arranged for the complete expungement of any record of accusation against Erin, ensuring that her reputation was not merely cleared, but restored. Roger's ranch prospered under their joint management. Erin's organizational skills and attention to detail complemented his practical knowledge and physical strength perfectly. They expanded the cattle operation, improved the house with additional rooms and modern conveniences, and began to plan for a future that stretched out before them, bright with possibility. The townspeople of Cedar Falls gradually accepted Erin as Roger's wife, though some remained skeptical of her background and the circumstances of their marriage. Clara May continued to watch for any sign of impropriety or moral failing. But even she was forced to admit that Erin conducted herself with perfect propriety and contributed positively to the community. Erin threw herself into the role of rancher's wife, with enthusiasm, learning skills she had never imagined needing. How to preserve food for the winter, how to tend sick animals, how to manage a household budget that included planning for seasonal variations in income. She discovered that she had a natural aptitude for the business side of ranching, and Roger increasingly relied on her judgment in matters of buying and selling cattle. But perhaps most importantly, Erin found in Roger a true partner, someone who valued her opinions, respected her intelligence, and supported her dreams for their shared future. He encouraged her to continue her education, bringing her books from Denver and engaging in long conversations about literature, politics, and philosophy that stimulated her mind as much as physical intimacy satisfied her body. Their happiness might have continued uninterrupted if not for the arrival in late summer of an unexpected visitor. Erin was in the garden, harvesting vegetables for dinner, when she heard the sound of an approaching buggy. She looked up to see a well-dressed woman stepping down from an elegant carriage, her face hidden by a fashionable traveling veil. But when the woman lifted her veil, Erin's breath caught in her throat. Standing before her, looking travel-worn but determined, was Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell herself. "Anna, my dear," the older woman said, her voice heavy with emotion, "I've come to apologize in person for the terrible wrong my family did to you." The reunion was emotional and cathartic. Mrs. Caldwell explained that she had sold her Boston mansion and moved to Denver, where her sister lived, partly to escape the scandal surrounding her stepson's arrest and conviction. She had heard about Erin's marriage and had felt compelled to make the journey to Colorado to see for herself that the young woman she had once treated as a daughter had found happiness at last. "I should have believed you from the beginning," Mrs. Caldwell said, as they sat in Erin's comfortable parlor, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "I knew Charles was weak, knew about his gambling, but I never imagined he would be capable of such cruelty. When I think of what you suffered because of my blindness..." "It's in the past," Erin said gently, taking the older woman's hands in her own. "I've found peace here, Mrs. Caldwell. I've found love. In some ways, if Charles hadn't done what he did, I never would have come west, never would have met Roger. Perhaps it all happened as it was meant to." Mrs. Caldwell stayed for a week, during which time she grew to love Roger almost as much as Erin did. She saw how he cherished his wife, how he protected and supported her, while never trying to diminish her independence or intelligence. When she finally departed for Denver, it was with the promise that she would visit again soon, and the satisfaction of knowing that Erin had found the happiness she deserved. But Mrs. Caldwell's visit, wonderful as it was, also brought an unexpected consequence. Word of her presence at the Mallister Ranch and the story behind it spread throughout Colorado territory. Suddenly, Erin found herself something of a celebrity, the wrongly accused woman who had found love and vindication in the American West. Newspaper reporters began arriving from Denver and Colorado Springs, eager to interview the couple whose romance had captured the public imagination. Erin, who had spent years trying to hide from attention, found herself thrust into the spotlight, whether she wanted it or not. Most of the attention was positive. Erin's story resonated with people who understood what it meant to be judged unfairly, to be forced to start over in a new place, with nothing but determination and hope. She received letters from women across the territory who had faced similar challenges, thanking her for proving that it was possible to overcome false accusations and build a new life. But the attention also attracted less welcome interest. Charles Caldwell, now serving a prison sentence in Massachusetts, learned of Erin's newfound celebrity and began sending threatening letters through intermediaries. He could not accept that the woman he had tried to destroy had not only survived, but thrived, and he was determined to find some way to bring her down. The crisis came in October, as the first snows of winter began to dust the high peaks of the Rockies. Erin was in town purchasing supplies when she was approached by a man she didn't recognize, well-dressed, soft-spoken, with the kind of smooth confidence that immediately put her on guard. "Mrs. Mallister," he said, tipping his hat politely. "James Thornton, attorney at law. I represent certain parties who have an interest in your situation." Erin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. What kind of interest? The kind that might prove profitable to all concerned. Thornton replied smoothly, "My client has authorized me to offer you a substantial sum of money in exchange for your silence regarding certain past events. A final settlement, you might say, that would allow everyone involved to move forward with their lives. Charles Caldwell sent you." Erin said the words a statement rather than a question. Thornton's smile never wavered. "My client prefers to remain anonymous, but I'm authorized to offer you $5,000, a considerable sum, in exchange for a signed agreement that you will make no further public statements about your experiences in Boston." Erin felt anger rising in her chest, hot and clean and liberating. "Tell your client," she said clearly, "that he can keep his money. I have nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of, and nothing more to say about the past. My silence isn't for sale." Thornton's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "Mrs. Mallister, I would strongly advise you to reconsider. My client can be persistent when his interests are threatened." "Is that a threat?" "Merely an observation about human nature," Thornton replied. "Good day, Mrs. Mallister. I trust you'll give my offer careful consideration." Erin watched him walk away, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and determination. She had spent too many years running from Charles Caldwell's threats and manipulations. She was done being afraid. That evening, she told Roger about the encounter. His reaction was swift and decisive. "We're going to Denver," he said. "Tomorrow. It's time to end this once and for all." "Roger, we can't just—" "Yes, we can," he interrupted. "You've been running from this man's shadow for too long, Anna. It's time to step into the light and show the world exactly who Charles Caldwell really is." Chapter 13. Justice at last. The journey to Denver took 2 days by train, and Erin spent most of the trip wrestling with anxiety about what they might accomplish. What if no one would listen to them? What if Charles Caldwell's influence still carried weight, even from prison? But Roger had been busy during the weeks since Mrs. Caldwell's visit, using his connections in the territorial business community to gather information about Charles Caldwell's activities. What he had learned was damaging enough to destroy whatever remained of the man's reputation. Charles had not limited his criminal activities to stealing his stepmother's jewelry. Investigation had revealed a pattern of fraud and embezzlement dating back years, involving multiple victims and substantial sums of money. The theft that had destroyed Erin's life was merely the tip of the iceberg. In Denver, they met with territorial prosecutors who were already building a case against Charles for crimes committed in Colorado. Erin's testimony about the planted necklace would provide crucial evidence of his pattern of manipulating others to cover his own crimes. More importantly, they met with newspaper editors who were eager to tell the complete story of Charles Caldwell's downfall. Within days, papers across the territory were running detailed accounts of his crimes, including his unconscionable treatment of Anna Caldwell. The public reaction was swift and overwhelmingly supportive of Erin. Charles Caldwell was revealed not as a wrong gentleman defending his family's honor, but as a coward and a criminal who had tried to destroy an innocent woman to save himself. James Thornton, and the smooth attorney who had tried to buy Erin's silence, found himself facing disbarment proceedings for his role in attempting to obstruct justice. Charles Caldwell, already serving time for his original crimes, faced additional charges that would keep him in prison for the rest of his natural life. 1 year later, Erin stood on the front porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Roger work with their prize stallion in the corral. Her hand rested on her rounded belly where their first child grew, and she marveled at the chain of events that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. The ranch had prospered beyond their wildest dreams. The publicity surrounding Aaron's story had brought them business from across the territory, and their reputation for honest dealing and quality livestock was spreading throughout the West. They had purchased additional land, hired reliable hands, and built their operation into one of the most successful in Colorado. But more than financial success, they had found the deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful together. Their marriage had grown stronger with each challenge they faced, each obstacle they overcame, as partners rather than individuals. A letter had arrived that morning from a young woman in Kansas, another mail-order bride who had been abandoned at a train station and was seeking advice about her situation. Aaron had immediately sat down to compose a response, sharing her own story and offering encouragement to this stranger who faced the same fears and uncertainties she had once known. Sometimes, she wrote, what appears to be abandonment is actually redirection. Sometimes the wrong platform leads to the right destination. Sometimes the courage to stand up to injustice, to refuse to be defined by others' judgments, opens paths we never imagined possible. Most importantly, sometimes the greatest love comes not from perfect circumstances, but from the willingness of two imperfect people to face the world together, with honesty, courage, and unwavering faith in each other. Roger appeared beside her as she finished the letter, reading over her shoulder with the comfortable intimacy of 2 years of marriage. Good advice, he said, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. Think she'll take it? I hope so, Aaron replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. Everyone deserves a chance to rewrite their story. Everyone deserves to find their home. As the sun set over the Colorado prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to set the very air on fire, Aaron reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place of peace and belonging. She had learned that home was not a destination to be reached, but a choice to be made daily, that love was not a reward for perfection, but a gift freely given and received between two people brave enough to be vulnerable with each other. The abandoned bride had become a cherished wife, and the accused thief had become a respected member of the community. And the woman who had once waited in despair at a lonely train station had discovered that sometimes the wrong train brings you to exactly the right place. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the prairie, carrying other travelers toward their own uncertain destinies. Aaron smiled and went inside to help Roger prepare supper, secure in the knowledge that she would never again be left waiting on a platform. Never again be alone, never again doubt her own worth in the eyes of the world. She had found her home at last, not in a place, but in the love of a good man who had seen past her circumstances to the woman she truly was. And in that love, she had found not just happiness, but the strength to stand tall against any storm the future might bring.